Vineyard.
There's an incarnation. There's a fleshing out that is essential to our faith. You know, it's like what James would say, we need a faith that works. It's not just the activity of faith, but that it actually works. It's actually genuine. Doesn't spawn so many nuns and duns out there. Like there's actually discipleship and transformation. So I would say to myself, maybe what you're reaching for is now, how does this flesh out? You're going to run into some people. Pay attention to that. Wow, I would have never known who would be my best teachers in that moment. It was the truck driver who'd just been, he taught me so much by surrendering himself to that ministry team and being released of demons.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. In today's episode, our host, Jay Pathak, talks to David Ruis. David and his wife, Anita, are the national directors for Vineyard Canada, and David is a well-respected worship leader and songwriter. Let's listen in.
David, thanks for joining us.
Oh man, this is great. I'm actually really excited. This is
cool.
And
you know, we just got to be together. Was that 2 weeks ago we were together? Or was that 3 weeks ago now?
I think it was 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks.
2.5 maybe.
Or 2 years. Yeah.
I know it's the crazy time. It's like we are in a Doctor Who episode for the rest of our lives. Like it's just, there's no getting out of it.
No. So 2 weeks ago, we were together in the UK and we got to spend a lot more time. We've been together in a lot of environments, but I think that was the most sustained time we've had together.
Yeah.
Which was nice.
Yeah.
With national directors. And it was great.
Yeah, it was cool. And then I think if you remember, we showed up a little early. You ended up being there early. So we actually were able just to sit down and connect. And I don't think actually we've met as couples ever.
No, I don't think so.
So that was kind of cool.
It was great.
With Anita and Danielle. Yeah.
And I had brought all the podcast equipment with me to do 4 different podcasts.
We kept trying.
And we did 0. I did literally 0. I didn't do anyone else. I didn't do you. There was just too much to talk about with Vineyard Global. So here we are doing it by Zoom. So thanks for making time.
Love it.
And you may or may not have gotten to listen to what we do. Mostly we're just trying to hear stories of people in the Vineyard. We Are Vineyard. And how this thing is formed.
We Are Vineyard.
We are. Oh, that's, man. Maybe we could just put that in there. There you go. That'll be season 2. A new.
I just infringed a whole pile of copyright laws.
I was going to say.
So Casey's going to be going, no.
We would be sued for that. But I would just love to hear a little bit about where you were born, how you grew up a little bit. Give me like early David Ruis first. Yeah, I want to hear early. Tell me about.
Wow, you're kidding. Okay.
No, I'm not kidding. I want to.
This is cool.
And I actually got to hear some of this one time. We were at a conference together, and you had just done your ancestry DNA stuff that brought all kinds of new parts to bear to this.
Oh,
anyway,
so that's an ongoing story. Yeah, I mean, the snapshot is this, and some of this information I'm just finding out recently, and the reason I'm finding out recently is because I'm adopted.
Yeah.
And so I was... my earliest memories are in the family I was raised in. I was of an infant, a few months old, as it were. But adopted into a Dutch home. My dad and mom had actually just within a year, probably 2 years max, had just become new followers of Jesus, had been baptized up in a little Baptist church up in northern Alberta, Edson, Alberta. Both of them had immigrated from Holland and came out of the war, like crazy stories. Yeah, both my dad and mom. My dad was urban and my mother was rural. And her father actually had an elaborate escape system and hiding system for Jewish people under his barn. Several of my uncles were with the Dutch underground. Yeah, it's just kind of crazy. And my dad was in Rotterdam, actually urban, had a plane come down in his backyard, crashed from a dogfight that had gone up over their house, basically way up there. And
are you serious?
I'm totally serious. Like a huge chunk of I think it was a German plane came down, and so just crazy stuff like that, right? And so my parents carrying sort of all that experience forward, had immigrated to Canada. My mom was younger than my dad. They're new believers, and then they've got this adopted kid. They couldn't have children of their own. So I was immersed in acceptance. Like, it's kind of weird. I have a sister that's almost 2 years younger. She was adopted as well. We're not blood related. And she just had a different experience with it all. A little more, wrestled with it a bit more. I don't know what it was. I somehow just leaned into this adoptive thing. My mom used to sing over me, you're my little adopted child. Like, I've heard stories, and I've got a lot of friends that find out when you're 16, or, you get a big talk when you're, in your adolescence or something. Right. And it can be quite traumatic for some people. But even for my sister, I remember, I don't know, it's probably about 7 or 8, my parents sitting us down, and they were going to explain this whole adoption thing. And we were like, oh, we know that. Like, and we just, got up and went and played. Like, it was just so much a part of my identity. And I think it's impacted the way I've been able to engage in my faith, in theology, in trying to, understand some of these, God, all that stuff. So I just have it as a tremendous gift. And then coming into my 50s, started finding out about my mother was 42 when I was born. She had been suffered an accident which gave her brain damage, which put her then in a mental institute. All those horrific black and white horror flicks of, being in a mental, she was being experimented on. And they went in to do a frontal lobotomy, found a brain tumor, tried to operate on the tumor, and gave her brain damage, and then tossed her out of the institution. Oh. And she just literally kind of wandered across the whole nation of Canada. She was born in the East Coast, and I ended up being born in a little Salvation Army hospital in Calgary, Alberta, which is where I was born. And then that's where I was adopted. My parents had ended up there when I was adopted. And that's where I grew up until 17 years old. Just finding out literally in the last 8 to 10 months that through 23andMe, I'm 52% Italian. I'm Italian.
Wow.
So it's like finding all this stuff out about that, which is an unfolding story. Have discovered a first cousin through this 23andMe thing.
Wow.
I know this is going out there public, but no one kind of knows I exist, like, in that whole thing. So I won't say names or anything like that. Very interesting. So I've kind of I've wandered off into the story here somewhere.
No, it's beautiful.
Yeah. So, it's actually really shaped and informed all stuff. I kind of, it's interesting. I started just this morning, I started writing something, and I kind of started, I think a penny dropped, this understanding, in the midst of all this neo-Calvinism and different things and sovereignty and all this stuff, all of a sudden it dawned on me, this thing of, I was chosen. Like, I've kind of always had that thing. In fact, in grade 7, one of my buddies, after a basketball game, grabbed me. I am short, but I could touch the rim in high school. I practiced. And, dude.
Wait, like, hold up.
Oh, yeah. I had a serious vertical.
Dude, that's hot. Yeah.
Dude. That's so I love sports, right? I know we're kind of in the same vein on that. So anyway, my buddy, he slams me up against the lockers. He literally said, I'll never forget this. He goes, "You're so lucky." He says, "You were chosen. My parents were just stuck with what they got." And he dropped me down, and he stormed out of his name was Martin. We talked about this years later.
Wow.
But I don't know. There was just something. I don't know. There was something of a security or a confidence. I was probably a bit of a jerk. Must have been, but like that. But I wasn't afraid of that part of my identity because that shows that sense of being chosen, I guess, had really settled deep into my gut.
Wow.
It's kind of weird, isn't it? It's sort of interesting. So, but just
it's
today,
sovereign. Really
this penny
powerful.
dropping. That's like, so was I chosen because I was better? No, I know myself well enough to know that that's not true. But now finding family.
Yeah.
And particularly on my mother's side, I found a half brother and a half sister, and the healing that's happening in their lives, and the things that I'm able to bring into their stories because of my story is bringing so much redemption and life. And I'm just going, that's what it's about. You know, Israel being chosen to be a light, not to be this, you know, the jerk of the nations, but to be the servant of the nations, you know, then Jesus having to flesh that out through his incarnation and messianic vocation and going, no, this is what it's always been about, is about taking all of that blessing, privilege, favor, whatever words we all want to use on it. And it actually is liberating to give all that away, like to step back. You know, sort of in our cultures, we sort of have this, you know, pay it back kind of thing. I think it's even way deeper than that. But that kind of starts getting at it, right? It's like, so anyway, we're kind of going all over the place.
No, I love it. So let me ask you some questions about that. So then was faith in the center of life growing up? I mean, was like life with Jesus and thinking about what it means to be in church or the scriptures, or how, what was sort of in the mix?
Yeah, I think, great question. My parents, as I said, had been fairly new to their faith. Yeah. So my coming into their world was very much a part of all of what that meant for them. They were in a fundamentalist environment. I certainly wouldn't say my father in particular was a fundamentalist by any means, but was deeply, deeply grateful for salvation and his encounter with Jesus. We sat together because of his history in immigrating from Holland and, you know, growing up in the war and all that. When I was in grade 6, he was doing grade 6 math. And he would have a tutor come, and sometimes we would sit and do our math together, which didn't seem abnormal to me then. When I think about it, it's like kind of weird because he was working in an excavation company, was kind of moving up in the system, and they wanted him to start doing estimates because he was just really good at looking at stuff, knowing what kind of needed to go here and there and such. But he didn't really have the math skills, so he just stepped into learning math at grade 6 level so he could keep doing this job. Eventually he actually owned his own little excavation company in Calgary. But
well, and how humble he's doing that with his kid. I mean, you
know, how incredible is that, eh? Yeah, he's an amazing guy. You know what? He was the best man at my wedding.
Wow.
Isn't that kind of cool?
Wow.
Yeah, that actually making me kind of get a little emotional here.
Yeah, me too.
He passed away some years ago, but yeah.
What a gift.
Yeah, and then, you know, I never talked about it much. I mean, you know, of course it was part of our family narrative, and then my son asked me to do the same when he got married a few years ago.
Oh, my goodness.
So this thing of, is family... Are you born into it? Is it something, you know, it's kind of a both and, right?
Yeah.
So back to this faith thing, I think we were in a Baptist church. I was 12 years old, and Pastor Purdy, Jack Purdy, was the guy. And he just was doing a pretty classic salvation message. And I think just the environment, maybe just feeling, it just hit. And I couldn't sleep all that night. And I just really abandoned my life into the hands of Jesus. I went and I woke up my parents, and and the crazy thing is I've told this story a couple times, not very often, but so this is back in the day, right? And I was super cool. So I had white corduroy pants.
Oh, yeah.
So,
okay.
So with the heels, you know.
Oh, well, that's on purpose. Yeah, you don't do that on accident.
I was only 12, but I was styling. I was doing it.
I love it.
So anyway, in the morning, those were the pants I put on. And I remember just the visceral aspects of salvation. You know, obviously it's more than that. But for me, it was a very immersive, holistic kind of a thing. And I remember over the years, I kept those pants. I know it's not super
because it was that moment.
Good theology or whatever.
No,
if I was having a super bad day, I'd try to squeeze these pants on, and obviously they didn't fit for very long. But you know, so it was a bit of a gong show. I realized it was more painful to get the pants on than just deal with the hard day I was having. But yeah, it was a very And so Jack Purdy actually became a pretty significant person in my life. He was a very loving pastor. We weren't in a very big church, a little church in Calgary, Fellowship Baptist Church, which has been a wonderful journey coming back full circle in that. You know, when we stepped into the national role here, the first person I sat across from was the head of the Fellowship Baptist.
Oh.
And the first church we planted when I was 21 was a Baptist church, which then we encountered the Vineyard. It ended up with us being removed from the denomination, but always had a deep appreciation for those roots. But it was a very, very painful separation.
Yeah. Wow.
So to sit across the table from this Fellowship Baptist guy 30 years later, whatever, was quite remarkable. And we've struck up a great friendship. So just a few years ago, in their national gathering with the Fellowship Baptists of Canada, it's a Canadian, there's no American cousin. It's a large denomination in our country. He had me come and do a welcoming at the opening address, share a little bit, and lead some worship.
Oh.
And it was the most, I didn't even know I needed it.
Yeah.
But there was something so healing and we're on totally different pages, you know, just like, but it was this amazing moment. So Jack Purdy, really took an interest in me. So I actually interned there at 16. I preached my first sermon in that little community. And to this day, you know, it was back in the scene there where you had, you know, the chairs on the platform. And there were these old chairs that had been made specifically for that church by an old craftsman, an old woodsworker, and he made these beautiful kind of chairs, whatever style. But Purdy, when I went to Bible college, gave me one of those chairs. So I still have that chair to this day. That sits upstairs. Yeah. That was from, you know, my earliest days in the Baptist church. So at 17, I grew up in Calgary, as I said, left to go to seminary college in Vancouver. And
at 17?
Yeah, because I graduated. I was a December baby.
Oh.
So I was 17 when I graduated high school, and then I started college that fall. And then at the end of my first semester, turned 18.
Wow.
Yeah, so had my theology degree at 21, and then we planted our first church. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, wait. So back up a little bit and tell me about how music has worked. How has music
great question.
been in your life? Because if anybody's been with you leading worship, or even just on a team, like there's musicians that, you know, they're technical musicians. They do their craft. They're up there, they're playing, they're into it. And then there's musicians where it seems like music overtakes them and moves through them. And worship takes hold of their whole body, you know, their minds and their... And I experience you that way. You know, when we're even
that's interesting,
the
Jay.
time leading worship, you know, there's other folks leading worship where we're at these meetings a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And you notice there's this little cajon, and I just see you like, I gotta get in there. You know, you just go over and you grab the cajon and you're playing and you're singing. And I just experience you as someone who there's a way that worship, and specifically musical worship, moves through you, takes hold of you on behalf of other people, and you're captured by this thing. So so anyway, I was just curious as I was thinking about our time talking today, like, how has music worked in David's life? Like,
I mean, it's been a huge part of my life. My parents, when I was 5, enrolled me in piano lessons. And I had this old gal. She was brilliant, probably not the most renowned, you know, whatever. It's just, you know, you just kind of, she lived in our neighborhood. So I just walked to her house, and, you know, that was kind of the beginnings of it. And kind of took an interest in me. Piano, you know, was really my instrument this whole time. It's kind of funny. Wimber and I would talk about this all the time, just kind of laugh, like, you know, try to be a keyboard player in a guitar dominant worship culture.
Totally.
It was pretty brutal, actually.
Totally.
At some level.
Totally.
But it was kind of just an interesting, you know, trying to make that match You know, I can play a little guitar, but it's not really my main instrument, although I love picking it up. It just different tone, texture, it just kind of pulls out a whole other vein of creativity and such. But this gal, she did every Sunday afternoon, she'd just have whatever students wanted to come over and she'd just do a sing-along. That's kind of interesting, right?
So you have the lessons you're doing, but then there's this other free form, like, hey, just come on over.
Yeah, she just and so she heard me singing. And she pulls me aside, pulls my mom aside, and she's like, I think this guy's got a voice. Like maybe we should try and do something with that. And it was kind of funny because she's not professional. It wasn't like, going to a music school or something. And so she started enrolling me in what's called the Kiwanis Music Festivals, which are across Canada. And they're sort of it's a recognized sort of vein of that sort of stuff. And I feel uncomfortable talking about this, but I started winning. I was like at 5, 6 years old winning these vocal competitions.
So that's really young. I mean,
it was really young, and it was super challenging because I was not supposed to be able to do that. All I was really doing was doing these sing-along things in this afternoon. I wasn't being professionally or properly trained, if you will, and yet was making my way into this thing. What happened alongside of that when I was 7, there was a ad in the paper, a sort of an invitation for auditions for the Calgary Boys Choir. There had never been a Calgary Boys Choir. There's an old guy he was old to me then, Doug Parnham, a brilliant guy, very well respected in the city, and he always had this dream to begin a boys choir. So I went and I auditioned and just had this instant connection with Doug. Like it was like this thing.
This is 7?
So, yeah.
I mean, this is so young for all this.
Yeah, but if you're in that world, it's not that young.
I guess not. Well, the world of being an elite singer? Yeah, I suppose.
Well, yeah, maybe that. Yeah, okay. I wasn't putting it in that category.
I am. That's what it is. I mean, but that's amazing. This is cool.
It is. It was so much a part of my initial formation. Right. So I was then moving up in my piano, I was getting now into the Royal Conservatory training stuff. So you're doing more it was all classical.
Right.
Then I'm in the boys choir, did the lead. They did a production of Oliver, I did the lead in that and stuff. And it was very life-giving. I just loved it. And then my voice started to change fairly early. So then Doug had me shift to become the pianist for the performing choir. By this time, there's 3 layers of the Calgary Boys Choir. It had some world recognition, and then I was the tenor for the operettas that they were doing. So we did this brilliant production. Benjamin Britten rendition. He did a operetta based on the story of Horatio Nelson, the admiral, the British admiral that fought in Waterloo. If you go to Trafalgar Square, that's the statue is. So anyway, all of that stuff going on. Boy, you're getting all kinds of stuff out of me, Jay. I didn't know. I wasn't going to talk about all this.
I want to, though, because
no, this is great. No, I love it.
What I find amazing is the way, even just listening to you, because, of course, I know I'm cheating because I can see where things go, right?
Yeah.
To see all of these little components of your story.
Weave.
Yeah, exactly. It's so interesting to think.
It is.
You have this sort of radical salvation. You have all this music in your background. So it isn't like, because that isn't always the way it works, right? Sometimes people encounter music out of an experience with God and then they become musicians or whatever.
Right.
Which is fine, whatever. Everybody has their own way into this thing.
Yeah,
but for you, music is essential to how you're thinking about your life and your gifts and your abilities. And
I think it definitely was woven in there for sure. Yeah. So it was interesting because Doug Parnham, probably had the most significant influence in me musically. He was the director of this choir. And we moved back to Canada. We'd been in LA almost 11 years, came back to Canada. All of a sudden I get this random call. Some people on this that are listening might know the name Todd Rutkowski. He's been part of the Vineyard thing. He's been part of the global mission stuff and all that. He's on our Canadian team here. His wife works in hospice. And she calls me one day and she's like, there's this old guy that is on his deathbed. And somehow your name came up. She says, I don't even know how this came up. I think he knows you. His name is Doug Parnham.
Wow.
So I had this incredible connection with Doug, like however many years later. Like, you know, I'm in my 50s at this time. And then probably the last time I saw him, I was about 14.
Wow.
And he talks about those days. Like he has these memories of Oliver and like this and that. I don't know. It was like such a gift.
Wow.
So that really was in me. But you know what, Jay? It was so interesting because I think of the context I was in. So where my faith was being shaped was in a very conservative environment.
Well, I was going to ask you that.
I loved music in that context.
Right.
You know, even at 12 years old, you know, I'm behind the pulpit, you know, doing the
conducting.
Well, because that's how we did it in the Baptist church.
Oh,
right?
I see.
The pianist is playing, and you're
you're helping the audience.
Yeah, you're conducting and you're bringing the voices in, and that's kind of how it's done in some of those contexts, right?
Great. Okay.
It's like this is where Wimber did bring a pretty significant thing into the context of particularly the conservative world of the church. This introduction of band and work. So I had no band experience. All I was trained was classically. I never played in a garage band. I loved all kinds of music, but I never had anything. So my faith, it was interesting. It was so much a part of who I was. But when I felt a call at 17 to go to college seminary, I had an opportunity to join. I had a pretty significant space open that I could have opened up for me in the Southern Alberta Opera Company. I just didn't feel quite right about that. I had auditioned for the Vienna Boys Choir and had made the cut when I was about 10 or 11. My parents just felt uncomfortable with sending me to Europe, and I would have been in boarding school and all that. I'm actually really glad they made that decision.
Right.
Actually, I was living in LA, and there was an article came out in the LA paper about some of the abuse that had happened in that organization with young boys. And it was the exact window time-wise that I would have been there. So anyway, that's just another thing of just seeing God's, kind of hand in all of this. So I went to seminary college, and I didn't take one music course because.
Well, and are you still playing music? Are you still like?
Yeah.
Okay, so so it's still around. You're like
it's very much part of me, but I didn't see my life as being leading Easter cantatas and
right.
And it wasn't an anti-classical sentiment. It was I couldn't see the integration of musical worship into what a pastor was.
Totally.
I wanted to preach the word, man. I wanted to it was like that kind of whole thing. And so coming into the Vineyard was this incredible moment of integration for me. It just put it together.
Okay, yeah. So let's get there. So you plant a church at 21. It's just interesting to me. I didn't know how much singing and music. I mean, these things are like early on at a really high level. Seriously, it makes sense of things to me just knowing you.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's helpful.
And then you have this encounter with God. You're squeezing into your corduroy pants from time to time.
That's exactly.
Which I love.
Yeah, they're journeying with me through the whole thing. Yeah,
I'm serious. I mean, I think we all have some of those things. Like for me, I think we really downplay the power of our bodies, right? In our faith, right? Like, so for me, this sounds silly, but for me to smell coffee, just the smell of it, gives me the sense that the Holy Spirit is with us. And here's why.
I get you.
Because as a new believer, I sat in a coffee shop where they're grinding all the beans in the morning. I would do it before I did anything else, and I would read the Bible, and I would pray. And I honestly think something got linked neurologically in my mind.
That's great. Totally.
To these experiences with God.
That's awesome.
To where, I mean, I honestly, if things don't seem like they're going well or whatever, for me to just go through the process to like grind the beans, make the coffee, so that the smell is in the air, not just that I have a nice cup of coffee, is a calming experience.
That's great.
Like and is that is that real? What's real? I don't know. All I know is my body has been conditioned a certain way.
That's right.
That enables me to experience that. So even like hearing that story is really funny. Like, yeah, that sounds right. Like, yeah, I get it. Yeah. So, okay. So then
we'll have to go early someday. I'll come down to Denver. We'll go to a coffee shop, grinding the air. I'll go buy some white corduroy pants. We'll like sit down and we'll have a moment.
The Lord will be with us. Yeah. So but then you plant a church at 21.
Yeah, Fellowship Baptist Church.
Wow.
Anita and I and another couple planted together. And again, we were kind of mavericks. We did this co-pastor thing when it wasn't a thing.
Right.
We split the grant money from the fellowship. Myself and this other fella, I mean, it was quite a complementarian environment, which my wife constantly is reminding me of how hard that time was for her. And it was legit. It was brutal. So I'd interned for 2 years at one of the larger Fellowship Baptist churches in Vancouver. They wanted me to stay on, and it just wasn't a fit.
Yeah.
And then actually there was I guess, I mean, this is okay to have this open. This is like, 40 years ago or whatever. But there was the Fellowship Baptist Church in Fort St. John, Alberta. I had a guy just die, and he gifted them a massive part of the royalties from an oil well that he owned.
Great.
So they were set.
Good for him.
And so they contacted me and wanted to hire me. And my dad was like, you got to go do this thing. Like, why would you do a crazy church plant? And the thing about the Fellowship Baptist up in here in Canada, they are a legit church planting movement. Like, they got that. And actually, I think my passion for the local church and its establishment, sustainability, and health really came from the Fellowship Baptist and was only accentuated as I came into the Vineyard.
Right.
But my deep belief in that, the grassroots expression of faith in community really came from those Baptist roots. Anyway, so had these things dangling, and we just felt like we were supposed to take this risk. So I talked to my dad. He's like, well, I didn't think you were supposed to go to Bible college, and you did that, and that seemed to turn out okay. And he goes, if this and that, I go, oh, well, just give it a shot. We'll see what happens.
Let's keep going, I guess.
You're young enough. If it screws up, you just jump into the university and just like do whatever.
Yeah, get a real job.
Okay, here we go. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, did I go way off on a tangent there?
No. So you go to plant when you have other options. And is it just old school, like we show up in town, get to know people, or what was the model?
Yeah, the other couple had history in the area. We're actually, we've come full circle. We're back in the same city that we planted our first church in.
Wow.
And it was quite a remarkable experience. So this is pre-exposure to the Vineyard. This is 1986. But we were hungry. So in college, they did a seminar, pretty intensive seminar on why we're cessationists, basically. And there were a handful of us that were like, this just isn't adding up. My sister had just had a significant encounter with the Holy Spirit, which literally saved her from the end of her life.
Wow.
She was in a bad state. So I'm holding this and I'm bringing this up, and they're like, well, yeah, that could be God, but it's not. That's just like so rare. The Holy Spirit doesn't really. I'm like, this isn't adding up. And then we're going to the biblical text like we were taught.
It's amazing how hard we try to explain stuff away, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's like this First Corinthians thing, it just can't be the canon of Scripture. Like, so the interesting thing was there was a handful of us, and then this other couple that we planted this church with in Kelowna, we had come to a conviction, a non-cessationist position with zero experience.
Wow.
So when we, in that particular system, when you're going to plant, it's a pretty extensive vetting process. So we had to go through what they called an advisory council, which is theological watchdogs, for the thing. The pastor I'd been interning with was the head of this committee.
Oh, wow.
So we're in process with that. We're having to present our papers. But because we hadn't experienced anything, it was okay. Like, we'll kind of let this go. And the main reason was because our church was growing so rapidly. And it was conversion growth. It was 80% conversion growth. We grew from a handful to just over 300 in the first year. We were baptizing people in the lake here in Kelowna. Like, we couldn't keep up. It was remarkable. And in the midst of that, because of this, I guess, awareness theologically that the Spirit of God somehow has more of a role in this. But here's the interesting thing. We did a bunch of surveying, and we went around, and there was a couple really rapidly growing churches in our city here as well, charismatic. We were really nervous about the charismatic stuff. We'd come to a theological conviction that this stuff could happen, but what we'd sit down and we'd go to a service and we go, but it ain't that. Which was so judgmental. It was.
Wait, but why? Why? What was the not
weird.
that?
It was too weird.
It's like, this feels like I have
Tongues,
to enter another
all this
universe.
Crying and this and that. It's like, nah.
Right.
We know there's something, but it can't be that.
Yeah.
That was kind of our assessment, right?
I get it.
But what we did go is we went, there's something about the worship. There's something different. So this old beat up upright piano, had a friend who was a flute player, and overheads. This is like so weird, but this is only 1986. This really isn't that long ago.
Right.
Like, to move to you could actually, okay, here's another piece of the story. I'm so sorry. This is going so a guy named Vern Middleton,
I love this.
Vern Middleton, who'd been a missionary in India for years, a brilliant guy.
Yeah.
Came back, was a prof at the college that I was at, and he was the church growth, church planting prof. He was like sitting in that.
I bet he's not a cessationist.
Well, here's the thing. Exactly. But he sat, I didn't even put this together till just now. He sat in Wimber's first MC 510 course.
Wow.
He comes back and he's trying to explain this stuff to us without losing his job.
Right.
So I don't think he'd mind me saying this. He because he's told this in different settings, like years later, right? He actually was being prayed for in one of the classes with Wimber. And he felt tongues kind of rising up in him. And he just requested of the Lord. He said, if I'm to keep my job, if I'm to stay where I am, this can't happen.
I can't do it, man. Yeah, please don't. Please don't.
He said the whole thing just eased down, and the people that had their hands on him just kind of backed off.
Wow.
And I leave that with Jesus. I think he was befuddled. Was that the right thing? Was that the wrong thing? But it was his experience at that time. And I think he was really, really desperate to just pour what he could into the rest of it.
Wow.
So I was musical. He knew that. So he kept trying to explain to me how you could actually do songs back to back to back. You could just change it with the overhead, and you didn't have to wave your arms. You could you could do it from the piano. And it was so, Jay, it was so foreign to me. I had no grid for this.
It's just revolutionary.
It was, and I couldn't figure it out. So when I was still in college in my last year, I never figured out how to do it.
Wow.
So something was in that. We see the musical side of the expression of worship happening in these churches. So we thought, well, we just got to try. I was the guy who had the music training, so I was the one thrown into the pool. So I just started, hymns with the flute player, and instead of stopping and starting, took a felt pen and wrote out the words on an overhead. So it was a little more you weren't looking down at a book, and we just started experimenting. And then it just started growing and growing and growing. So then Hosanna Integrity was brand new.
Yep.
It was like something kind of there, but I mean, I wasn't all into the big horn shots and the this and the that.
Right. Like, felt too flashy.
It just felt, it wasn't compatible. I loved it. Like I listened to it like crazy, and then Maranatha, had kind of been doing its thing, but already it sort of was into Maranatha Strings number 457. And it was, I just was like, that's just not the thing. And then I stumbled into this little cassette of, I think it was called Hosanna, from this thing called The Vineyard. And there was a donkey on the front with a palm tree. It was like this really, and it was just this little cassette. And it was so simple. But it wasn't just the simplicity. There was something about, there was an authenticity. It was about authenticity more than simplicity for me. There was just something that rang. So we started doing a few of these songs, and it was just kind of like this, wow, this is really, really starting to stir. So we were doing a series on the 10 Commandments. And I went down to my basement. My daughter had been born by this time. She's really young, my oldest daughter. And I just was tinkering around, and I just went, I will worship. And then she goes, I will worship. And I'm like, oh, that could kind of work. Like maybe there's kind of like this repeat thing here. All of my heart. And that's how that song was born.
Wow.
In this little Fellowship Baptist church that was exploding with conversion growth because we ran out of songs. Like we legit ran out of songs that felt real to us.
That you could do in this new way you were learning, right? Because there's just not a bank.
Some of the hymns, and it was like, okay, we just, regurgitating.
Yeah, I can kind of fit this one.
This is the day we'd sung 5,000 times. And it was kind of like, what's going on? And there wasn't a lot out there. It's hard to conceive of a time in history when you couldn't Google new worship song today and you get like 1,000 hits. Like it just wasn't the reality. And so wrote that in this space.
Wow.
Right around the time that I went down to Anaheim for the first time. And that's when everything started to topple.
Every month on the We Are Vineyard podcast, we introduce a new book or recommended resource to dig in deeper. For May, we're recommending that everyone reads Miracle Work by Jordan Sang. Later this month, we'll interview Jordan to hear a deeper dive on his book and much more. Miracle Work is available through Vineyard Resources and wherever books are sold.
Yeah. So what year is that? When do you
February of 1987.
Okay. So February 1987, you've got a cassette tape. You're building this church. How did so is it the tape that took you to Anaheim, or did somebody say?
It's the other couple had been exposed to some of the Vineyard stuff. There was George Malone was pastoring a church called Burnaby Christian Fellowship in Vancouver. And had a relationship with John. And he was the first person to bring John Wimber up into Canadian soil. So that would have been, I think, like 85, somewhere in there. We were still in college. And they went and were deeply impacted. But again, trying to explain it to the rest of us was just like, there was just like, I can't describe to you how there was no grid. Like when Wagner coined the third wave thing, people coming out of conservatism into an awareness of the spirit, like it was a revolution. And, you know, not to, you know, make one thing another, whatever, but it's like, you know, the wave in the mid 90s with Kansas City and then Toronto, I mean, there was some really helpful things, but that wasn't the revolution. The revolution was this sense of the inbreaking of the kingdom, you know, and the person of the Holy Spirit, which then personalized Jesus for us in a whole new way. And intimacy kind of came. And then all of a sudden it was like, whoa, there's the Father in this mix too. Like it personalized, if that makes sense. I don't even think I've even articulated like this, but it made everything so personal.
Yes.
It didn't diminish majesty. It didn't diminish holiness or any of those things, but there was an accessibility to the throne of grace in a way that we just had never even thought was possible.
So describe that. So it's 87. You guys just get on a plane, show up.
Well, what had happened? So the other couple had been exposed. We're experiencing. So we're doing the clunky piano, the whole thing, and everybody just starts crying. And eventually, we couldn't get through a thing. We just have to bail on the worship part and just go to our default and just preach our faces off. But everybody's but everybody's wiping tears and it's like we had there was one guy that came in, he was on his way. This is a legit, like, I'm not kidding you story. He's whacked. He's on his way to go murder his girlfriend.
Wow.
He's compelled, he's pulled into our church. And he's sitting in the middle of worship and just shrieks out this demonic thing. And we end up in this back room tussling with this, like there was all kinds of stuff happening. So we were like, we gotta learn from someone. Our denomination had put us at arm's length because they were trying to figure out what to do with us. Don Carson, you know, one of the New Testament Greek, you know, he had been part of our college and seminary for years, had now moved to the States, transition. He was just writing a book called Showing the Spirit on 1 Corinthians 12 to 14. So everyone was waiting for that to come out to see what if we would land on a position. They didn't know what to do with our church because they promoted us right across the country because we were growing so quickly.
Right.
But then we got this Holy Spirit kind of thing going on too. So it was really whatever. We're going, we don't really have mentors. We'd reached out to George Malone at Burnaby Christian Fellowship. We had him and a team come and expose us to, and really in a very powerful and gentle way, introduce us to the kind of clinic and ministry time, which was Vineyard, but George wasn't officially a Vineyard then, but it was like this thing. So there's this hunger. So one of our elders, a guy named Bob Young, I know him to this day, he's a dear, dear friend, fairly successful. And he's like, I'm buying you a plane ticket and you got to go down. And somehow I end up with a brand new Christian who was a trucker who I didn't know, a guy named Falk Druin. And somehow he comes down with me. I don't even know how this happened, but he becomes a part of this story, actually. So anyway, so I'm thrust into 3,000 people in a warehouse just by Disneyland, trying to figure out
what is this
on earth have I?
Right.
I'm too terrified to raise my hands because the first thing we were told when we were planting our first church, our coach said, here's one of the best pieces of advice I can ever give you. Don't you ever let anybody raise their hands. Just like, whoa, what is that? He just, if they raise,
that's such a strange,
dude. I know. It's like if they raise their hands, everything just starts going crazy.
It gets weirder.
You know, it's like moths to a flame. The Pentecostals will start showing up.
Oh
then
my
gosh, speaking
this
in
is
tongues.
Great.
All this stuff will start happening.
I love it.
He literally said this to us. Before you know it, your church will be split. Everything will go down and you'll be bagging groceries at Safeway before it's all over.
Dude, that sounds like there is a story behind that. Like he had some kind of painful thing happen.
You got to know anything. It. You got to know it.
Wow.
So in a weird way, as whacked as it sound, it put something in me. I had a deep-seated fear.
Well, you're a young man planting a church. It's like, I don't 21? Know, like, people know what they're doing. I don't know what I'm doing. If that's what he says, don't do it.
I know.
Yeah. Totally.
So I'm in the middle of this crazy Anaheim thing.
Wow.
You think I could raise my hands? There's no way in the world.
No way.
Even though I'm being immersed in this moment and it's beautiful, but it was this incremental ever increase of,
That's amazing.
I'm just pretending to wipe my hair, so sort of, kind of do one of these, or I'm not, you're just kind of, bending down to pick something up that you never really drop, so that you can sort of come up and at least try it, and then you put your hands down again.
Totally.
And it's like all this stuff is just swirling, and the teaching was off the planet, and I loved it. Right, I get trying to dig out my old binder from it was the first time they did Signs and Wonders 1 and 2 back to back. It used to be like they do Signs and Wonders 1 and then come back and do it. They combine them. Wimber wasn't feeling too well, so he stepped out of the plenary sessions in the morning and did the evening sessions. So Chuck Kraft stepped in, Brent Ruis stepped in, Tom Stipe stepped in. Like there was Peter Wagner did something. Like it was like there's this smorgasbord of stuff that you wouldn't have got if Wimber would have been well.
Right,
actually,
totally.
It was really intriguing. We're in the middle of this thing, and all of a sudden, this guy stands up on his chair, and he's like, "Thus saith the Lord!" And it's a huge group, right? He's trying to scream, and the worship's still going, and everything. And he's like, "Thus saith the Lord!" He's just like, and I'm thinking, what is happening? Like, what is going to go on?
Yeah, what is
whatever.
this? Yeah.
And then the worship stops, and he's like, one more try, right? Thus saith the Lord, and he thunders this word, and it was just like the room's just going, like it's just like it was. So Wimber walks up to the platform, and he goes, He goes, just kind of looks around, and he goes, "Well, people, do we think that was the word of the Lord?" And the whole place goes, "No!"
Oh.
And the guy just shrinks. But what happened is immediately there was ministry people around him and stuff. But I thought, I can trust this.
Yeah. There's courage here. Yeah.
It's courageous.
Yeah.
It feels biblical in the sense of it was a pretty nasty way to test if the word was right. But it was but the guy, what I realized, the guy was so insistent. It was like, okay, dude, you're going to push it that far?
Wow.
Here it is.
Wow.
And you know what? The discernment in the room is not a word from God.
That's right. Boy,
and I was like,
we must discern it, right?
Yeah, that put something in me and I think it was at that moment I let my guard down a bit more. Like I was just able to trust. Then I think it was the next day, there's this worship thing happening, and all of a sudden I hear this roaring, raging, awful, dark, screeching kind of stuff. And I look beside me, and it's the truck driver.
The guy that came with you.
We're at the back. Oh. It's so loud. Wimber's like going from the front, "Don't be afraid. These are the sounds of freedom, not just this," and I'm going, yeah, right. Like you're not standing beside the guy, and you don't have to go back to the freaking hotel.
This is a guy I'm going to travel with.
Like this is the guy I'm traveling with. Jay, he bends over. I'm not kidding you. And he takes the folding chair that was in front of him, and he starts crumpling the chair like a piece of paper.
Wow.
It's literally just, and he like throws the thing down, and he's just raging. It's like the whole place just goes into slow motion, right?
Totally. Yeah.
And he's like, and then it's like ministry people are just like, running across the thing to like come get this guy. And this is the guy I'm sleeping with.
Wow.
In the same hotel room.
Yeah, in the same hotel. And
it's like, just for clarity. So it's like, I'm laying there that night, and I'm terrified.
But wait. But does it, like the whole ministry thing? Of course,
they get him. They actually took him out,
of course.
And he was a lot more settled and everything. He couldn't really. so much had happened to him. He didn't really know what to say. And you have to remember, like, I hardly knew this guy. I don't even know how
he doesn't even, the guy. Totally.
He's a brand new believer. He's probably been saved like 2 months. We just baptized him in the lake.
Wow, dude.
And so I have this fitful sleep, and it's early in the morning, and I look up. He's staring in the mirror. He's just staring at himself. You know how sometimes in the motels they have, like, there's the bathroom area with the toilet and stuff, and then there's like a vanity that's outside of that, and there's a little sink in the mirror. So that's what it was. So he's over that vanity, and he's looking in this mirror, and I can see in the reflection he's just weeping.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh no, I'm gonna have to call his wife. Like, he's
gone. He's lost his mind,
gone.
right?
He's gone. I'll have to just book out of the rest of the conference. Like, I'm literally thinking all this stuff through. I'm going to have to call, change the plane ticket. How am I going to explain this? I just think he's gone. I think he's just gone. And I'm going, Falk, what's happening, man?
You all right, man? Yeah.
Yeah, are you okay? He turns around, and the tears are streaming down his face. And he goes, David, for the first time in my life, I can look in a mirror and not hate myself. The voices are gone. And I just went, oh my goodness, that's what this is all about.
Yeah.
It's about this. Like, all this stuff, all this hoopla, it's about this.
Amen.
So from that moment, I kind of had this burning in my hands, and they would mention it sometimes, like in the ministry time, and if you're feeling that. But it was like I've described it before, like, I think it's still just the best way I can describe it. I knew it was God, but I felt like I was sitting on a Harley Davidson with a full tank, and this thing was ready to go, and I couldn't kickstart it. I could not kickstart it. And with all the fear in me, and the fear of raising of hands and tongues and all this stuff, all of a sudden it was like this thought came, maybe that's what tongues is about. Maybe it's part of the Kickstarter. Like, it's not an end unto itself. Like, there's something about this.
Right.
So I started kind of, I guess, humbling myself, maybe, or in another way, turning from the fear of it. Because it was, and then I'd had this experience with Falk in my head. I'm like, so if this is what that unlocks, then it'd be kind of cool. John calls for ministry time, the classic stories, right? Probably went home and ate ice cream and was watching cartoons. And the rest of us are praying for each other, thrown in the deep end of the pool, trying to learn. This lady turns around to me, and she's been an abuse victim ever since horrible abuse when she was young. And again, I can feel my hands just burning. And I'm looking at her, and I don't know what to do. And back in the day, I think the author was Gary Collins. So they had this. He sort of had the Bible on Christian counseling. It was a big yellow book with red letters on the front, Christian counseling. And I have a semi kind of photographic memory, so I'm madly flipping through the Christian counseling book, like in my mind, right? Like, okay, what chapter is this in? Like, what do you do? What do I do? Person with abuse, and it was just not. It just was not going to help. But I couldn't. I know this sounds weird. I probably have a different way to articulate it now, but just for the sake of time and what I was experiencing in that moment, I couldn't access the healing, if that, it was this really weird experience. And again,
so you're just reaching for what you know. You're like,
exactly.
I have this other tool. Exactly. I don't know. Maybe this is what I'm supposed to do.
That's it. And then the penny's dropping even further. Okay, there's something in my relationship with the Holy Spirit that's lacking here. Maybe it's a little bit like Acts, where they'd show up and people were falling. They'd say, well, have you experienced the Holy Spirit? No. Okay, well, let's give this a try. Like in my experience, that's what I would parallel it to. Like, I was one of those people, I was kind of out there, fell in love with Jesus, but there was this other piece of things that I wasn't deficient necessarily because I didn't have it, but I couldn't walk into the fullness of as a disciple of Jesus without it. Like, I just couldn't get there. So anyway, Wimber, there was the next day, he calls all the pastors forward, and I just get completely comblombulated in this thing, and I explode in tongues, and I'm doing feast sit-ups, and I'm thrown on my face, and I can't move, and I mean, it's like it went on for 2-3 hours. They take me in this back room, and then they're like, well, what's happening here? I guess it was quite dramatic, and I'm Italian, so it kind of was coming. Oh, that was
right.
23 thing. I didn't finish that part of the story. 52% Italian, and then the other half of me is Celtic. But anyway,
okay, a lot of passion.
So you've got this, this whole thing, and I'm thinking, okay, well, man, if this ain't God, like, let's get it out of here. And they're whatever, and it just seemed to be the Lord. I mean, it was really physically dramatic.
Wow.
And the tongues that were just pouring out of my mouth, it's just like my mouth was stretched so wide, it was hurting. Like, it was like, so they're just going, okay. They said, David, like, what did you want? Like, why are you here? Like, and it was the strangest thing, because the only thing that came out of my mouth was, I just said, I just want to be like Jesus.
Yeah.
And they were like, wow, that's kind of a good thing. So let's just they said, so when this tongues thing happened, what's going on? Can you speak it? And I'm like, no, all my Baptist sensibilities, right? If it's the Spirit, he'll make me do. They're going, well, no, same Spirit that filled you right now, gives us self-control. Like, there's all this stuff. So, maybe you can just, and I was like, oh, that's kind of helpful. And they kind of helped me stumble my way into sort of engaging with this a little bit more. And I went back, and I'd already seen Falk, like, delivered, although I wouldn't have had that language for it then.
Right.
I'm going, what is going on? And then all I could think about was this lady. And I thought, Lord, if this really is you, like, if this is really you, I gotta see her again. Like, just give me that. Just give me that. Like, just that assurance. Like, because I couldn't pray for her, and it was bothering me. Like, I thought, if this is happening, so I can get to that. Show me, because that would help me trust this is really you. And I tell you what, I walked around the corner back at the thing, and it's like 3,000 people, whatever it was. And I literally walked straight into, we bumped into, I was so startled. I didn't pray for her. I didn't anything, but it was just this moment. I looked in her face, and I just went, oh my goodness, this is the Lord.
Yeah.
And this is what it's about. It's about her. Like, it's legit about her. And so I came back home, and it was crazy. People just I started praying for people. I mean, people would be praying for someone in the living room. They'd literally launch over and land on the kitchen table, and healing started, like, along with the salvations and stuff, that never alleviated that much, but there was this whole other thing going on. And then at the end of 87, we just had a phenomenal encounter with the Holy Spirit, which some that are listening would know the reference to that. And, it became pretty significant. Our church here, grew to a significant size. It did become part of the Vineyard after we had left. We didn't leave under duress or anything. We ended up in Kansas City. This is kind of a whole long other part of the story there. But this was the genesis, of being in the Vineyard. Even though I officially wasn't in the Vineyard yet, I became a Vineyard pastor later.
So, David, there's any number of folks that would still be the sort of Baptist version of David, right? So they're listening to us and they're going,
what on earth?
Yeah, well, and they're going, I know there's something going on here, right? I know that I'm supposed to know more of the Holy Spirit. I know that I have these moments like you had with that woman where something's supposed to happen right now. Not just my wisdom, not just I teach my way through something, but the Lord is supposed to do something with me in prayer right now with someone, but I don't really know how to do that or what to do.
Yeah.
And I've been around some of the charismatic things, and it just seems weird. Like, I don't know that I could do that.
Yeah.
I just find, I was just with a few folks this week, and they're going, so how do we do, like, what now? What do you want? I mean, literally, we're sitting there at the table. They go, what do you want to do right now? And I go, I don't want to do anything. I don't know. And they're going, but I know this is real. Do you just put your hands on me? Like, what do we do now? Because I want more of this, but I find myself reticent.
Yeah.
Maybe even the way you described it. I like the way you described it even psychologically. Like, I don't think I'm allowed to even raise my hands, let alone like whatever this is.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So what would you, let's do it for you. What would you want to say to you maybe before you go to Anaheim? Like,
ooh, wow.
You know what I mean? Because you're already, what's interesting about your story is you're already sort of primed, right? Like you've already been in the cessationist class and you're like, that's not real. Like something's not right about this, but I don't know about what I'm supposed to do. So I don't know. I'll just keep doing. What would you want to say to you? Like even pastorally?
Wow. So I'm looking at myself and I bought the ticket, like I'm on my way or
maybe it's earlier than that. You have like the tape.
Gotcha.
So like your appetite's wet, but I don't really know what's supposed to happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of people. I mean, at least
the
people I bump into,
yes,
who aren't like angsty. There's plenty of angsty people. So but I'm not referring to that. Like you were, dude, going for it. You're leading people to Christ. You're preaching, you're leading, you're fumbling in through worship, that door. There's something happening. The Lord somehow meets me in this.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a weirdo. No, you know what I mean?
No, I got you. Even though I've done some pretty weird things, but yeah.
Well, but I mean, just the inclination is like, I don't want to be that guy, like I want to lead people to Christ. I want to make disciples. I don't want to end up in conferences every day, all day. I want to do ministry. What would you want to say?
I'm speaking to myself with a bit of hindsight. Is that is
totally? You get to go in a time machine and say,
gotcha.
Let me tell you something.
Maybe it's back to this thing. We were talking a little earlier, like there's a personalization, there's an incarnation, there's a fleshing out that is essential to our faith. It's like what James would say, like, we need a faith that works.
Yeah.
It's not just the activity of faith, but that it actually works. It's actually genuine. It's actually doesn't spawn so many nuns and duns out there. There's actually discipleship and transformation. So given that aspect of what I would say to myself, maybe what you're reaching for is now, how does this flesh out? So it's like, you're going to run into some people. Like, pay attention to that. Like, that's...
Like, when you meet people who it seems as though ministry has been fleshed out through their whole life. Pay attention to those people.
Pay attention to those people, but then also pay attention to which I did, I guess, in my experience, but I'm going, wow, I would have never known who would be my best teachers in that moment. Right. Was Falk. The truck driver who'd just been, he taught me so much by surrendering himself to that ministry team and being released of demons. I learned, even though I wasn't able to complete a conversation with that woman who had been abused as a child. Looking into her eyes, I learned as much in that moment as I had through all the plenary sessions the plenary sessions are giving me a frame to begin to give articulation and hopefully invite others into this. But I don't know if I'm making sense, but
you are. We interviewed Steve Cuss, my dear friend.
Yeah.
And he said a line that is sort of haunting me, actually, since we talked to him, where he said his Bible teacher in seminary said to him, we all love to preach the passage or refer to the passage that God's power is made perfect in our weakness.
That's it.
Okay, so
that's great.
If that's true, that's not just like a Hallmark thing that's helpful to help people who are kind of sad in a moment or whatever, but like his actual power is actually made perfect in weakness, meaning there's a way that power is made manifest that doesn't show itself in strength.
Yes, that's
okay.
It.
Like it shows itself in weakness. That means weakness in yourself,
yes,
and in others,
yes,
creates a form of desperation,
yes,
that teaches us and draws us towards God in a way that your best days don't. You know, your best days don't. Your steady days aren't going to bring you in touch with the presence and the power of God in the way that weakness does. And weakness doesn't necessarily mean somebody died or you got sick or you got a flat tire. Weakness can mean you're staring into the face of someone that you know needs God.
That's it.
And you're going, I don't have that.
Yeah.
Whatever you need right now, I don't have. I'm flipping through the books in my head. I love that analogy. I don't have it. Yep. What does that mean?
Yeah.
And somehow in that desperation, you find yourself up front.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and you watch it in another person.
I think you're so right. Paying attention to that stuff. I've thought often of, Matthew 10, one of Jesus' instructions is leave your money belt at home. Mm. And then I flip forward into the book of Acts, where they, is it Peter and John or something? They say, hey, I don't got any money on me.
Yeah.
All I can give you right now is a prayer.
Yeah.
And I've often wondered, are those two things actually connected? Like there was something, it's that same thing of you can intentionally position yourself to be weak.
You can. That's right.
To not only rely, don't just carry forward into the moment your defaults or even your strengths. And they'll probably be used at various times, but your dependence isn't there. Another thing I've thought a lot about, which you're making me think about in what you just said, is I think one of the most underdeveloped, not taught on well, or we don't know how to give great articulation to it as part of our spiritual formation, particularly as leaders, is the quality of meekness. Mm. The capacity to show restraint, that even when I am having the good day, even when I do have all the goods at my disposal, I actually lay it down for the sake of the other. So I think this is so informative, I think, of our understanding of the posture of ministry.
Yeah.
Do I have the word and I'm going to give it to that person, or I'm going to put my hand on their head and I'm going to there's something kind of cool about that in a way, but what does it look like to show restraint in that moment?
Yeah.
Go, you know what? I'm actually really hearing really clear from the Lord right now, but what do you think? Mm. What do you think God's saying to you right now?
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing can maybe help them so that you're not the one in the driver's seat all the time. Mm-hmm. And so when Jesus describes himself as being meek, which again does not, it's our Anglo-Saxon, lexicon just does not unpack this word well. It just can't grab it because it's this selfless restraint.
Yeah.
But it's out of this place. I think it's Vine's dictionary that talks about it as being this inwrought, the Old English, right? This inwrought work of the soul. Where you're so secure, you're not consumed with yourself at all. Mm. So Jesus is like, come close to me because I'm meek. I could blow you away right now. I could be unattentive, and just because of my strength could hurt you. Even unintentionally. I don't know, that's kind of crazy to think like God like that. But but he's like, but I am intentionally going to hold back on some stuff. For the purpose of you drawing near to me. Now that's where you'll find rest.
Amen. So I want to tie up another piece of your story, and I know we're a little bit long, but if you have another couple more minutes, I want to do.
It's because I'm Italian.
No, it's me. I blame myself. I want to hear, just to pull in a piece here, I want to hear, how then do you see, or did you experience worship and presence hooking together as you're having these encounters, right? So all of a sudden, you are experiencing worship, you're writing this song, you're seeing God encounter people to where they can't function.
Right.
But now you've had this encounter, and now you're going back and leading worship.
Right.
Because, you know, of course, the great little phrase Wimber would say all the time, you know, the power is in his presence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
mm-hmm.
And that presence we experience is often in the context of worship. So how did you start to see shifts in worship? You know, because you're obviously a prolific worship leader. You have all this talent of music behind you. You're no longer conducting. You've already kind of gotten out of that space. You're dangling for the keyboard.
Yeah.
But now you're in the vineyard and having these encounters. Well, let me just reflect what I see from you, David.
Yeah. I'm
never in an environment where you're leading worship that I don't, and I'm reading into you right now.
Yep. Go for it.
But that I get the impression that you when you're leading worship, you're expecting us to encounter God together.
Yeah, no question. Yeah.
By the little things you're leading us into, the pauses you create. I assume those aren't all planned, though some of them may be. The idea that we're just going to like move through music so that music would be interesting to us, or even that we might have our own little private moment with God in worship, doesn't seem sufficient. You're leading us as though God is with us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that can take different forms. We're going to sing, but then maybe we'll take a minute and we'll pray. Maybe we're going to take a minute and reflect.
Yeah.
And I see that as all presence oriented.
Yes.
Like the idea
no question.
that we're in the presence of God together when we do this.
Yes. Yes.
And I can't help when I'm hearing your story. You're going from conducting to a keyboard, then this encounter. I imagine you're suddenly like, well, we have to think differently about how we're curating this space. If this is the kind of stuff God does.
That's it.
So tell me a little bit about how you started to see that happen.
At some level, it's all response. In the days leading up. So not even preparing for that worship moment, but aware of what the Lord is doing in community, in my life, so it's like, okay, we're coming into this moment with high anticipation, expectation, and in fact, a conviction that God is present. So even in what we're bringing to him, it's like, how am I trying to find language? So someone's died earlier in the week. Like that informs how we're responding to the Lord as a community as we come together. Yes. This is why I find some of the conference thing is quite difficult, because you're left to just create something to invite people into it, so at least we can get some sense of common ground.
Yes.
So even let's take it in so I'm walking into the Berlin Stadium some years ago. There's tens of thousands of people, or whatever. So my prayer is constantly, maybe it's a little bit almost like our sort of go-to in the vineyard. Okay, Lord, what are you already up to?
What are you already doing? That's right.
What's the common threads that you're pulling together, even in 80,000 people right now?
Yes.
And we want to respond to that. And one of the great ways you've given us to do that is through music. So it's not about just sing songs people know. It's about, let's discover what we can say together that's going to help us really respond to the presence of the Lord right now.
Yes.
If that kind of makes sense. So what it does then is it lets you color outside the lines, right? Because maybe there is a song no one's ever heard before.
Yeah.
That will give language to that.
Yeah.
And you drop it in the moment and it defies all the worship leader rules. Wait a minute, nobody knew that song. How can they be singing that at the top of their lungs by the second chorus? Yes. Now, it could be because it's a really well-crafted song.
Doesn't hurt, right?
Doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt at all. And I think this has been one of my difficulties conversations constantly ongoing, especially, we're talking about, an overhead. There's not any more new song, we're in a different era, different space.
Yeah.
As we're navigating a completely different musical landscape as far as worship, and except, nobody even thinks twice about talking about worship teams or even a worship leader.
Yeah.
Like, there were no worship leader positions when we were first stepping into this.
Right.
There was some song leader spots, or you could lead worship, but it wasn't, it's John Barnett sitting in his closet after, working for the Southern California Sanitation Company or whatever it was. And he's literally covered in human excrement. And he's sitting down in his closet from a long day of work, and he writes Holy and Anointed One.
Yeah.
I mean, that, like, how much better does it get than that?
Yeah.
And you don't want to just grab that from some nostalgic stupor, but you're going, no, there's something that came out of life, that came out of community, that came out of so it's like trying to navigate all this. I think we need to be very careful that we're not conflating worship with entertainment.
Yes.
Having said that, I'm not binary on that.
It should be good. Right. Do a good job.
Entertainment is all, like, I had my Zebra, I still own them, right? I bought them in Frankfurt. I got Zebra docks, and I would in LA do some weddings and some DJing and some dance stuff. And Dr. Schlaven was my handle. And I love entertaining. And that's not a violation of my faith, but that's not what I'm doing. When we're calling the community of faith together to respond to the presence of God and discover together what that looks like. They're different.
Well, and when I'm listening to you, I hear two things that are really powerful. One, the person leading worship is curating their own awareness of God as just a way of life. So I'm thinking, like, what is God doing around me? What is God doing with these people? And of course, what I heard you saying is that becomes sort of artificial when you do a conference, because you're like, I don't really even know these people. I don't know this place. So the work required to become attentive goes up. But in your day-to-day life, like if it's in your own church, your own city, you're going, God, what are you doing in the life of our community, or in this city, or in this place?
Exactly.
Through this week as I move towards a Sunday. And so you're doing that for yourself, but then you're also trying to cultivate a community of people that live and behave this way. One of my favorite things to do every time we show up for a small group or a Sunday experience, we like many churches have prayer before our services. That's not perfunctory. It's saying, okay, God, we're doing all the things we're doing, but we really want to know what you're doing.
Oh, gotcha.
And the thing that I always ask in the room is, what do we think the Lord is saying to us this week? And what I'm always interested to see is, do people look shocked, or like a little surprised? Because if they look a little surprised, that means we've not been doing a good job in discipleship. That, guys, this is the kind of thing we should just be thinking. And to my great delight, nearly always people are like, I as I was praying for us this week, I had a sense of a few things. Not just the worship leader. That's the person who's serving in our cafe. That's the person who is working with kids that week. And they're not just thinking about the kids of the cafe or the worship. They're thinking, no, this is what we do. We're a discerning community. And then worship and preaching and ministry time and prayer time all fit into those frameworks. So, and I experience that differently when I can tell someone's been curating that. Versus a person who's just really good at leading this set.
Gotcha.
And they have the skills to lead. And by the way, that's all great.
It is.
But there's something different when it's, no, I've been living my life into this. I've been hearing from God, and then I'm going to have that spill into the way I lead in this environment. On a Sunday, on a Wednesday.
Exactly. Whatever. And I mean, even take that in the conference thing, and I think I know you well enough. I think you do something similar. From the moment, let's say you're only there a few days, picked up, you start asking questions right away. Sometimes I'll get an email, in those settings, what's your song list? What songs you want to do? We want, and I'll always just usually respond right away, go, well, what songs are you singing? what's resonating with the people you know are coming. Like,
yes,
what speaks to what the moment that, you know, Alabama's in right now, or Sacramento, or Frankfurt, or you know, wherever we are, so you can actually, I mean, you can't get there to the same depth when you're just in that day-to-day trenches, but you can be aware. And I think you're right. I think it changes something.
Yes.
So then now all of a sudden, let's say we'll take it into cross-cultural context, whether that's Nepal or Northeast India or Thailand or Africa, you know, and some of the African nations. When you carry that same heart into those environments, all of a sudden you're relating in a way, things become authentic. Like because you're connecting with where you are. It's almost that Eugene Peterson translation, is it, of John 1, you know, he moved into the neighborhood. It's like that same kind of, and I think that approach with even curating worship and liturgy and prayers and songs and rhythm and melody, all that stuff, it can, and that's why I think the cookie cutter thing is, to me, it's like jazz, like it should be like jazz. You know, it's sort of, you got the format. There's some great chord changes. There's some stuff, you know, works super well, but you got room for the different instruments, and particularly the musicians, that they can bring their kind of sensibilities into it. And then you might have these incredible moments of convergence that create, you know, something really spontaneous. And then you got a little bit of room. You could back off and let a solo instrument kind of step forward and find its voice. But you all know where you're going. It's not just loosey-goosey necessarily. It's not all by the seat of your pants. But you're so well prepared, you can be spontaneous. Well,
and if you don't have a sense the Holy Spirit's with you,
and
will meet you in embodiment,
massive.
Well, then you're not going to do any of that. That's way too scary. But if you do know that, like, hey, we're doing what God's doing.
Yeah.
In one sense, not to say that you can, you know, just wing it, but your confidence goes up. Well, actually, you still are afraid. I don't know how you feel, but I'm always nervous when I step into a moment to pray or minister, and it's like, gosh, I hope the Lord is up to this.
Yeah.
But your ability to sort of make that a way of being goes up.
Yeah.
And I experienced that with you, Dave. Well, anyway, I've taken a ton of your time. So
hey,
how about we wrap here?
I love this.
But I would love to be able to come and talk to you again.
Yeah, I'm up for it.
Okay,
you mean
good.
like this, or just you're going to come
like this? No, I mean, I'll do that too, obviously. I want to come back to you and do some more podcast stuff.
I know we went way over.
No, we didn't. No, it'll edit down beautifully. It's great.
Okay.
Thanks, man.
The We Are Vineyard podcast is a production from the team at Vineyard USA. If you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. Leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Connect with us online for additional resources. Our website is vineyardusa.org, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at VineyardUSA. Thanks for listening. See you next week.